Uncertainty, well, we still have a lot of it. So last night the vote was concluded. So the players voted in favor of going forward with the 2014 plan, and not everybody liked it. So all we know is they're saying, yep, 24 teams. That's what we'll do, which means that for 7 teams that aren't on the board, their season's over. And for people who say, well, that's not fair because this team had games in hand, and well, this team had a better winning percentage than that team, so this is as good as they could get. The idea of bringing all 31 teams back and completing the regular season, not going to happen. And now it's a matter of figuring out whether there's going to be 2 hub cities or 4. So if they were really, and I've seen this a lot too, like, oh, they're not thinking about safety. If they weren't thinking about safety, they would just have everybody playing in their home rinks. They just say, you know what, we're just going to have everybody back in their home rinks, and it's fine. It's whatever. And then it'd be like, well, fans want to sit in the tent, sure, whatever. So what we're seeing is an attempt to do this as safely as possible. So we're looking at 2 or 4 hub cities, and while Vegas and Columbus, if it's 2, may very well end up being where it is, Edmonton is making a pretty strong push, and Vancouver's been pretty vocal as well about low numbers and testing being available, and just the fact that they believe they can make it work. And the NBA is looking at bubble cities as well, and it looks like they're very likely to settle on Orlando, where they have a large number of basketball courts. Now, when we look at this, it's not perfect, and there are apparently things that are still being worked out. And again, going from what's being reported by Elliot Friedman, Chris Johnson, Pierre LeBrun, and all of the connected people, one thing that's still not decided is, okay, so you have a best of 5 here. Could the first round of the playoffs be best of 5 as well? So it's a matter of trying to make it so that it's as fair a system as possible, but we've seen best of 5 first rounds of the playoffs before. It's not like if they went best of 5 that it would really change things dramatically. It just means that every game has much more importance. I remember when the NHL went from a best of 5 first round to a best of 7, and I was actually disappointed, because I felt like it took some of the tension out of the games, and it did make the playoffs just a little bit longer, and I didn't like it. So I could see them changing this. And not only that, but part of what they haven't decided on is, okay, so these are your 24. Do they reseed? Now, I've seen people say, well, why can't they just reseed? The way I see it is simple. If you're going to have 4 cities with 6 teams in each city, well, you don't want a situation where the Rangers, as number 11, win a series and have to play the Bruins. Toronto wins a series and comes down and has to play Washington. So the only way that you're okay with that is if they're all in the same city. Part of what they're trying to do is minimize travel as much as possible. We've learned a lot over the last couple of months. We've learned a lot about how this is transmitted and how this works. So what the NHL is trying to do is, and they're working with local health officials on this as well, is figure out the safest manner possible to do this. And it is threading the eye of the needle. But I do think it can be done. Again, it depends on the location. It depends on how it's run. Now, if you have 12 teams in one city, that's a lot of people that are going to have to be in one spot, and you're going to have to make sure that they're blocked away. And so it gets kind of dicey. But after those best of 5 series are done, you're then down to 8. So you could have 12, and then you'd have 8. And a best of 5, you can get some of them done in a week. So you could have guys who come back, haven't played since March, get wiped out, and let's say Montreal gets taken out in 3 games by Pittsburgh. So that's done in less than a week, and Montreal has to be sequestered for a shorter period, and then they're done. And then every time that a team gets eliminated, every time that a round ends, the amount of work you have to do drops. So it's that first round where things are going to be the most dicey here and here, because you have 16 teams playing in this spot, 16 teams playing in this spot, 16 teams here and here. So it's going to be an interesting tale of how this works. And then whether or not they reseed, I think, is going to depend on whether it's 12 teams or it's 6 in each location. If it's 12 teams in one location, they'll probably find a reseeding. I personally favor reseeding, as in after the first round, if Montreal beats Pittsburgh, I don't like the fact that they play Philly. I'd rather they play Boston, even though Montreal versus Boston is a bad matchup for Boston. And if they just beaten Pittsburgh, they know how to beat a team in black and gold. Here's another team in black and gold. So there's some concern I would have for that, definitely as a Bruins fan. But, we'll see whether it's best of 5 or best of 7. And apparently not everybody who was on the conference call yesterday on the executive board wanted Chicago and Montreal in. They wanted a scenario where that didn't happen. The only way that they don't get in is if you basically increase the amount of teams that have a bye, which you'd have to increase that to 6, and then you'd have 10 teams coming in for each conference, 20 teams overall. Which, again, that makes it easier to make this work. But the NHL wants a scenario where if your team wasn't eliminated from the playoffs because of how many games were left, you have a better chance of being in this. And I think maybe you could have expanded these, maybe, but then you have to expand the West. You have to include one of the California teams who were all pretty miserably far out. Now, what happens after this? I don't know. And the question I have that I've had the whole way through is, so right now we're looking at 7 teams that may not play again for quite a while. They haven't played since March. And there's an interview with Ryan Miller yesterday, and the idea that his year in Anaheim's done, well, it's got to be frustrating for him. This may very well end up being his last year. And so it's just, and career over. And there's going to be cases of that happening. There are going to be guys who retire in between now and whenever the start of next season is. Because that's still all over the place. And keep in mind, they can't really plan next season in the midst of this either. You plan the playoffs, you figure out a way to make some sort of a tournament that will make as many people happy as possible. There's no way to make everybody happy. It's impossible. But next season you can't even think about. Not yet. We don't know what's going to happen between now and the start of next season, and how things could look different. And there are definitely virologists and doctors that are saying it could go this way, and they're not saying it's 100% certain it's going to go this way or that way because they don't know. And so there's still a lot of uncertainty, but I'm optimistic we're going to be seeing hockey. And again, the question of when does this start? According to Chris Johnston, end of July, so we might be looking at another 2 months before they'd even start playing. And how do you figure things out? And this is why they want to look at doing the draft before that. The June draft is pretty much dead. They would have to announced it, a month in advance is what they were saying. They'd have to give a month's heads up to GMs, and now we're up to May 23rd. So the idea of having the draft in June is pretty much dead. But do you have it before the playoffs? Do you have just a draft lottery of the 7 teams that aren't available here? I was reading that yesterday. Why don't we just have a draft lottery of the 7 teams that don't qualify for this tournament and have them draft 7 players? Now, the answer to that would be simple, because other teams that aren't available for that draft lottery and for that first 7 picks might have the ability to trade for one of those 7 picks once they know where they're going to fall in the draft order after this is done. And again, for people wondering, well, what's going to happen with the conditional picks? That's between the general managers. Jim Benning can pick up the phone right now, talk to the New Jersey Devils and say, hey, what do you guys want? Who's in charge? All right, well, pass me to the guy who's in charge, and what do you guys want? Because we want to keep that first-round pick. Or maybe call the Devils and say, hey, so you guys can have that first-round pick. We're not going to renegotiate this, just to confirm this is what we're going to do. Maybe New Jersey calls Vancouver and says, hey, we're not interested in that pick right now. We think we're looking at something else. Can we maybe get the rights to this player and maybe a second rounder and a first rounder on a late, just teams are going to be renegotiating deals. And one thing that apparently is being looked at as well is that contracts are set to expire June 30th. And by agreeing to this, the NHLPA is agreeing, contracts are not actually going to expire on June 30th. Free agency won't start July 1st. And signing bonuses aren't going to happen on July 1st either. Everything's just going to get pushed back. So by the virtue of this vote yesterday, which I was happy about, and I saw people say, I don't know what you're happy about because nothing's been decided yet. Just the fact they've moved forward with this agreement of this framework of just these 24 teams is a sign for optimism and that we can have hockey. Because at any point in time, the union could say, nope. And then they turn off the lights and we're all done. And they go, nope, we'll see you guys next year. So There isn't going to be a scenario that makes everybody happy. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And again, once all of this is agreed upon, I'll redo the board if need be, and then we can discuss it from there. This is why I'm not trying to get too caught up on all of this, because none of this is decided yet, other than this, the first part, where you've got 5 versus 12, 6 versus 11, and so on. And for the record, the Pittsburgh Penguins did vote in favor of this plan. As much as they may not like the idea of facing Carey Price in a best-of-5 series, when it can be argued that Montreal didn't play well enough to have a playoff spot. So, and I can't make the argument that they did, but we'll see what ends up happening from here. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support, and I will talk to you again soon. Oh, and I wore this because I'd like to have a St. Patrick's Day next year, so I never really had a chance. We didn't have a St. Patrick's Day this year, which is a shame because the St. Patrick's Day jerseys are really nice. So here's to hoping we have one next year. And so that's the optimism that you're seeing, that I still think we'll have stuff about a year from now. Thank you guys so much for everything. I will talk to you again soon.